Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today I have a simple question to ask. How does Hindenburg compare to Bremen? I've been having an absolute blast playing Bremen these days, the new steel tier 10 German light cruiser. It's a mines on steroids. But it doesn't quite do that now, does it? Hindenburg is still an absolutely incredible cruiser to play at tier 10. This AP is incredible, and while the DPM is a lot lower than we see on Bremen, Bremen does not have that much pen. I found myself oftentimes getting a ton of full pens, high damaging salvos, but not those citadels, not those dev strikes, unless it was on a really light cruiser. Hindenburg guns, though, are a threat to heavy cruisers, even out to longer ranges, which I found really valuable. If you'll recall, I also hypothesized in some of the later Bremen videos that Hindenburg and its 51 millimeters of high explosive pen is going to perform a lot better against the problematic ships in the game. Things like Libertad, for example, things like Vermont even. There's plenty that have 50 millimeters of armor that we can full pen, where Bremen cannot with its HE. Even 40 millimeters is getting to be a bit of a common armor value these days. Things like Valparaiso have 40 millimeters of armor. The old ships like old Montana have been powercraft, it seems, and they're 38 millimeters of armor, which of course Bremen does pen and will absolutely out DPM something like a Hindenburg. And how did that play out? Well, for the most part, pretty good, honestly. Hindenburg and its high HE pen allows for some very consistent salvos. It allows for some very reliable damage. However, one of my main points I made with Bremen was that it is very consistent. I found it way more consistent than Hawaii, for example, and still having a ton of DPM. I think Hindenburg here trades a lot of that fun factor that the DPM on Bremen has to gain even a little bit more consistency on some of the harder to deal with targets. It's still doing incredibly good work, but overall, I think I had more fun with Bremen. Enough fun, though, to spend all of my steel if I had to make the choice. I think that is maybe a more interesting angle to approach things, because Hindenburg is still one of my favorite cruisers in the game. I really do love playing this ship. These guns are incredible, surprisingly tanky, a lot of healing. Overall, a really good ship to play, and Bremen plays basically the same playstyle. In fact, in a lot of ways, I think it's easier to play Hindenburg. You have better firing angles. You also have much better shell velocity out to range. To 18 kilometers, Bremen has a 13.1 second flight time, where Hindenburg is 11.1. It's a full 2 seconds faster. These shells are just easier to use at those longer ranges, which, let's be honest, the games are pretty passive these days. So Hindenburg has some nice value there. And still, you're going to see in these games here, I've got 2 E's to show you, we get a ton of damage anyway. So is that extra DPM fun on Bremen? Yes, absolutely. Is it necessary? No, I don't think so. Hindenburg does more than enough. And certainly when you swap to that armor piercing, some of these salvos, like a 12k salvo into that constellation a little bit earlier, I've seen upwards of 15k without citadels, without arms race buffs, anything like that. Just the normal base Hindenburg AP with full pads can do up to 15k in alpha damage. Pretty insane stuff. So if you're still on the fence about whether you should get Bremen or Hawaii if you have to choose just one, I already talked about how Bremen is more consistent, Hawaii is more unique and interesting playstyle, and how oftentimes with limited resources, I will go for the more unique ship because I can often get a close approximation of a more standard playstyle ship like Bremen. Hindenburg, for example. If you're interested in Bremen, if you've seen all these hype videos, people playing it on stream, loving that ship, I think you should just go grind yourself a Hindenburg if you don't have the steel or if you have to choose one or the other. Get yourself a Hawaii and then get 14k salvos in a broadside Azumo. It's still going to feel pretty similar, although not quite as much of that maximum theoretical damage output. Yes, we're better against those problematic ships, but you're not always fighting the problematic ships now, are we? Sometimes we'll be facing ships that both can pen just fine. 38, 51, doesn't matter. The HE is going to go through, And perhaps we're in situations where Hindenburg can't citadel, where people are going to be angled or into battleships. Hindenburg does not have the best AP pen for 203s. It's certainly much better than the 150s we see on Bremen, but it's not great for 203s. So it's not like at closer medium ranges you're penning battleship citadels or anything like that. You got to go for upper belts anyway. And that's where that extra DPM comes into play, right? But a point in Hindenburg's favor, I suppose, has to be these close-range torpedoes. I don't know why they gave Bremen 12-kilometer torps that do even more damage than Hindenburg's close-range torpedoes. But the big downside there is that they're quite slow. They're kind of the zoning torps that we like to call them, I guess. In situations like this, you want the extra speed. Going from 50 knots on the torpedoes with Bremen up to 64 here is going to be very useful. It gives less time for something like the Mecklenburg to react and dodge these. More than likely, he's going to take a shot and turn in, so that's why we're not going to gray line, as well as, hey, there's a Valparaiso on our other side. Both these ships get a ton of torpedoes. Bremen actually getting upwards of 20 torps, where we only get 16 of them. But in this case, I think that extra torp speed got us those hits on that Mecklenburg, and he's flooding right now. What about the Valparaiso? A ship notoriously maneuverable, while the torps catch him in time before he's able to shift his rudder back, right? That would be the key there. I think we would have maybe 5 seconds worse travel time to him, and perhaps that's enough for a Valparaiso, as we know, to drift around those torpedoes. Instead, we get the dev strike, we finish him off, and our team was able to clutch out that game, getting us our first E. A little bit of a different battle, some focus on the main guns, a little bit more pushing, and of course some YOLO torp action, which is pretty fun with Hindenburg. However, not every game is going to look like that. What about playing on tiers here, and most of the enemy team, a lot of battleships here, very scary, coming for us, alongside 457 mil battleships. Yes. That is the problem here with playing Hindenburg, but as well as Bremen. These ships get overmatched. 30 millimeters of overmatch is a bit of an issue here. In a kited position, it's really nice to have the better firing angles, I gotta say. This is a small thing with Bremen, but it does have worse kiting angles relative to Hindenburg. Instead of 35 forward, 35 backwards, like we see on Hindenburg, Bremen has 35 forward, but 39 backwards. So it's harder to make use of that full DPM when you're under massive pressure like this. A lot of enemy ships here, as well as not many teammates. A lot of overmatch that we got to worry about. It is a difficult position here. Not a lot of island cover here either. So having that little bit of extra firing angle helps us out quite a lot, I think. Alongside that, we also just get more HP and we get more base healing. It's a small benefit, I guess, but it is nice to have. Hindenburg has 4 heals base, where Bremen only gets 3 heals base. So you'll overall find that Hindenburg is slightly tankier. They both have somewhat trolley armor, turtleback citadels, that kind of thing at closer medium ranges. Long range, plunging fire is still going to get you, of course. But I think overall the tankiness factor, Hindenburg clears just a little bit. Something else to consider, of course, is the advantage of Bremen in regards to tanking is that Bremen's advantage is its DPM. We've discussed this at length already. But if you're going to maximize your DPM, you gotta be getting all your guns firing all the time. If you're constantly maneuvering back and forth, not always getting all of your guns firing because you're trying to angle, suddenly that DPM advantage starts to dwindle because Hindenburg more comfortably can use this extra DPM. Not always, though. In fact, it is such a massive DPM advantage that it probably isn't overcome by that, let's be honest here. 307k HE DPM on Bremen. Hindenburg's down at 183. That is a pretty big difference. That's HE. And then AP 706 on Bremen, where Hindenburg is at 433k, which is still respectable, which is still incredible. Notice these salvos on Des Moines at 16 to 17 kilometers here. The AP is absolutely worth using on Hindenburg, and probably the better ammo type if you can find those broadside positions. Although, as I'm saying that, we're about to get the dumbest salvo of HE I've seen in a while. That is a triple fire instantly. If you don't know, I don't script my videos. It just so happened we're talking about AP and HE, and then that salvo comes through. A triple fire, absolutely crazy. I do think that Bremen is a better fire starter, though. Okay, Hindenburg has decent fires per minute at 9.6. It's quite reasonable, but Bremen's up at 14.5 fires per minute. So, yes, you don't have the full pens like you will get on Hindenburg on things like GK, right? 50 mil deck armor there. But superstructures are quite large at this tier, I would say, alongside also just lighting more fires, getting more consistent fire damage. We do activate Lutjens here, although that was a post 5-minute Lutjens in a game where I think we were firing quite often here already at the start of this battle. And that's something else worth mentioning is 16 guns gets you to Lutjens proc a lot faster, which of course is 140 hits for 7.5% better DPM. And we get to activate that sooner on something like Bremen compared to Hindenburg. Hindenburg still very consistently gets there. It just takes a little bit longer. So turn up all these crazy DPM stats, but make it a little less comfortable to play. And that's what you get Bremen out of Hindenburg. You don't get the full pens on the HE on the most problematic ships in the game. You don't get the better shell velocity out to range. You don't get the AP pen to go after cruisers at medium ranges. But what you do get is just absurd levels of DPM, forcing you to go for upper belts with the AP, forcing you to go for superstructures with the high explosive, and that still obviously nets you a ton of damage. If you know to play around those things, I think you may have more fun in Bremen. Personally, that is what I found. I enjoyed my time with Hindenburg. I had some great games. I also had some bad games. That is not necessarily Hindenburg's fault, right? It's down to the matchmaker a lot of the time. You're never guaranteed to have all your games go well, or if you are thinking that's how it's going to be when you play World of Warships, that's just not going to happen. That's not realistic. So having a good time in Hindenburg still, and well worth considering maybe dropping getting Bremen if you do have to choose one. If you have to choose one from this Steel Will event, Hawaii is a much harder one to find a counterpart to. Perhaps I should try. Maybe we should play some Jinan, might be the closest approximation of high DPM destroyer guns on a cruiser hull. However, it's got Alaska hull Hawaii, right? It's a pretty close comparison, Hindenburg to Bremen. It's pretty easy to compare these two. However, that's the thing with Hawaii. It's a harder ship to compare to. It's much more unique, and that's kind of why I have leaned towards recommending that one if you're on the fence. Although, consider the playstyle differences. If you're someone who enjoys Hindenburg and you don't like the destroyer caliber gunned cruisers, light cruisers at tier 10, you don't like how limited they are in their shell velocity, in how they have to go for superstructures, how they can't pen cruiser armor, right? If we're dealing with a Bremen versus Hawaii 1v1, Bremen wins that a lot of the time just because it full pens Hawaii everywhere, but the Hawaii can't full pen the Bremen everywhere. It's harder to play with those destroyer guns. You got to pinpoint certain areas of the ship, where with these heavier cruisers, or the German quarter pen instead of 1/6 pen, like we see on the high explosive, allows you to just kind of aim wherever, and you're probably going to get some really good damage in. But you'll have to let me know what you think in the comments down below, especially if you do have a Bremen. How do you find it compares to your Hindenburg? I'm assuming if you've got all these steel ships, you probably already have a Hindenburg. If you don't, you should grind it. But let me know. I would be curious to hear your perspective, because for me personally, I like both of these ships. I'm finding myself loving these cruisers recently. I've been having an absolute blast playing World of Warships in the last few weeks, and honestly, the last 6 months to me feels like it's gone pretty well. I'm thinking about doing a bit of a year in review towards the end of the month. But this last 6 months for me has been so much fun, and this last Christmas update has been a highlight for me personally. The new ships have been very interesting, but also it's curious to go back and look at what some of those ships are based on, and in this case, take a re-look at Hindenburg, and notice that this ship is still a monster these days. We are running things like Eye in the Sky, as well as Spotter Plane mod that allows me to get this spotter plane for longer duration and more often, because sometimes you get wide open maps like this one and very passive games. It's hard to push in with those. It's hard to sustain a lot of that incoming damage while you're in gun range. So it's really nice to have this extra range. And I find Hindenburg with this spotter up versus Bremen with its spotter up, Hindenburg's way better. No question there. Yeah, you're not as high DPM, but it's effective DPM, right? Oh, and I eat a Citadel there. Yes, it is still vulnerable. I was doing the classic turn away tactic to dodge a lot of the incoming fire throughout this whole game. So I thought probably they were getting used to me dodging like that. Let me try something different. And then, of course, I get clipped there. But we can still heal back from most of that. Fortunately for us, we do have a quite large HP pool here for a cruiser and ample healing. I really enjoy Hindenburg, guys. I gotta say, it's a pretty standard playstyle. It's not the flashiest playstyle. It's not gonna give you the insane DPM clips like we saw out of Bremen or Hawaii or anything like that. But it is a very, very solid cruiser, and honestly, well worth the recommendation that a lot of people give it. The Hindenburg line, that is, for newer players to play. I think once you get up here, it's going to teach you a very good heavy cruiser, open water, mid to long range role that can also, timing wise, push in and have a lot of battle impact. You don't have a radar here, unfortunately, so you're going to have a tougher time dealing with caps, but it's going to teach you how to play a damage focused cruiser pretty well. And it's very nice to see, for me, that Hindenburg is still doing extremely well these days. And it's not been super power crept in today's meta. Certainly, there are going to be better ships in this role, I think. But that doesn't mean that Hindenburg can't be played well, and we can't have a good time in this one. And with that Hayate going down now, we're just shy of that 300k milestone. But we do get another E in this one, and overall, we did pretty well in Hindenburg today, I gotta say. I didn't spend that long playing. It was like an hour and a half playing, and I got these games for you. It's that good. It is a very consistent ship, much like Bremen. They play very similarly. If you're on the fence about getting Bremen or Hawaii, or maybe you're someone who has no steel and you're feeling a little left out, you feel like the FOMO is getting to you and you're annoyed by that, get yourself a Hindenburg. It plays pretty similarly and honestly is a great time as well. And as for the build that I've been running on my Hindenburg, and honestly, a lot of cruisers these days, is the lighthouse skills without dropping concealment, okay? I've been doing a year of greed, I think, doing a lot of very greedy builds, dropping conceal, going for things like outnumbered and top grade, things like heavy HE that make our concealment even worse to proc things like top grade sooner. However, I'm realizing that I enjoy these situational buffs to my ship, I really do, but I'm missing concealment. I'm missing the comfort that comes with 12.6 detect. Running full lighthouse is really good, and I think I can pull it off sometimes, but it's hard, guys, and I find myself having more fun with a build like this one, where we don't quite get the theoretical max out of the ship, but I find myself able to play it a lot easier. So if you're someone like that, I would recommend trying this out. Go outnumbered, top grade, conceal, and then take adrenaline rush. In this case, I can actually go survivability expert instead of superintendent because we have 4 heals base. Bremen, I would definitely swap over to superintendent because I would want the extra heals. At a certain point, it's hard to get to that 5th heal in a cruiser, right? You're going to explode sometimes. Sometimes you're going to take permanent damage, and that last heal is just not going to be all that useful because all the damage you've taken isn't healable, right? And so I find myself getting some nice value to survivability expert here. Eye in the Sky plus having the spotter plane upgrade here allows for us to have more uptime than downtime on this spotter aircraft, which is nice. Worth noting that Hindenburg does have a little bit worse firing range than something like Bremen. Not by much, but it is worth mentioning, certainly because of passive games. We do want to be using our spotter plane from time to time. Allows us to actually impact games that are pretty passive a lot of the time. Notice we're not running range mod as well. Maybe this is a way to get away with not running range mod into today's more passive meta. Hindenburg also can get much better value out of this spotter because of that shell velocity. It's a little bit easier to play in that regard, I would say. Overall, though, I gotta say, Hindenburg is still really fun. Yeah, the 30 mil armor is not great these days, let's be honest. It's a bit of a brick. It's not the most maneuverable ship in the world. Sluggish rudder shift and turning circle radius, not the fastest at all. But the damage it puts out is still very, very good. And I really like the playstyle, I gotta say. It's just really, really fun to have consistent, solid gun platform that can play in the vast majority of situations. That's one of the reasons that I enjoyed Bremen so much. Felt like no matter what map I loaded into, I had an opportunity to play and perform well. Hindenburg also fills that role. So I'm very glad that there's an option like this in regards to Bremen. If you can't get that ship for whatever reason, you have a tech tree version that you can grind completely for free. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. I had an idea, or I wanted to know does Hindenburg match up to Bremen pretty well? And I think it does. They're very, very close to one another. Overall, I think Bremen is a little bit more fun for me personally. That extreme DPM is pretty addicting. However, I can't lie, the extra consistency, especially out of that high explosive into some very problematic ships, Valparaiso's YOLO pushing, Libertad's YOLO pushing, being able to send some HE their way and full pen them everywhere is really, really good. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching and have a great rest of your day.